I've made it clear that we will hunt down terrorists who threaten our country wherever they are. That means I will not hesitate to take action against ISIL in Syria as well as Iraq. This is a core principle of my presidency. If you threaten America, you will find no safe haven. Second, we will increase our support to forces fighting these terrorists on the ground. In June, I deployed several hundred American service members to Iraq to assess how we can best support Iraqi security forces. Now that those teams have completed their work and Iraq has formed a government, we will send an additional 475 service members to Iraq.
We believe it is critical for President Putin to prove by his actions, not just his words, that he is indeed fully committed to peace.
The administration shares Congress's concerns and those of other regional and international actors about the situation in Venezuela. We have not and will not remain silent in the face of Venezuelan government actions that violate human rights and fundamental freedoms and deviate from well-established democratic norms.
Well, 2014 has marked another turbulent year for U.S. foreign policy. From its latest military adventure in the Middle East, fighting the so-called Islamic State militant group, to imposing economic sanctions against Russia over the Ukraine crisis, Washington's list of countries and so-called rogue states is expanding at an alarming rate. Well, to discuss U.S. foreign policy for this year, let's turn to our guests for this evening. In the studio, I'm joined by political analyst Dr. Mohsen Saleh. Dr. Saleh, welcome back to the show. From Malaga in Spain, we turn to a former U.S. Marine, Ken O'Keefe. And Brent Bodowski is a columnist at The Hill. He joins us from Washington, D.C. A warm welcome to all of you, gentlemen. Dr. Saleh, let's begin with the Middle East and Washington's latest military adventure there against the so-called IS. Looking back on 2014, to what degree did U.S. foreign policy contribute to the growth and expansion of what has come to be known the Islamic State?
Well, first, again, the United States is a great contributor and participant for such movements like ISIL, like Qaeda, like Boko Haram, like any of these terrorist groups. Try to search about CIA, the United States. Here I have an article and an interview with Noam Chomsky, who is saying that the United States is the leading state of terrorism in all over the world. Many operations put down by Obama, ordered by Obama, in order to stir the stability of the states that might be able to have independence, freedom, and development. The United States always try, especially in the countries that is weak, like Iraq, in Syria, and in the third world, like in Venezuela, trying also to stir the situation in Russia, because they are moving towards...
Okay, Dr. Saleh, we are going to cover all of these regions, but going back...
But I would say that the United States probably is the leading power of terrorism, #1 in the world.
Yeah, you say it as a matter of fact, but there are those who would dispute the availability of evidence when it comes to such statement. Ken, I want to turn to you. What is it then? Is it incompetence? Is it misguided policy? Or is it intended chaos for the Middle East?
No, your speaker is absolutely right. And it is really undeniable at this point, whether we go back to the absolute fact of U.S. support, training, for funding. Al-Qaeda was the main scapegoat used to justify this insane war of terror. And ultimately, when we look at Al-Qaeda, the 19 so-called hijack bin Laden, all we see is CIA assets running around like fools, basically becoming the path that they were meant to be, When we look at ISIS, ISIL, IS, whatever you want to call them, we see that they have been trained and funded in Jordan. This is not disputable. Our good friend and ally in Turkey has been shuttling them across the border. A very fine young woman reporter, Serena Shim, was murdered in Turkey, exposing the fact that Turkey was running these militants across the border. When we look at the equipment that they're using, that's American equipment. We look at our major proxy counterparts in the Middle East. The medieval Wahhabi Salafi regime in Saudi Arabia is the major funder for these people, whether it's Al-Qaeda or Al-Nusra Front or ISIS. All of this is to justify the insane, never-ending war policy. It's the hallmark of America. It is always in conflict. It always needs a boogeyman, and it is even taking the world to the Third World War by picking a fight with Russia simply because Russia refuses to play part in this game any longer. This is the truth, and those who are reading attention, we can see this.
Okay, Brent, your response to that, I'm sure that you don't entirely agree that this is, in fact, the truth.
No, I totally disagree with what he just said. The war against terror is not insane. The United States is not looking for wars. That's just nonsense. And I do want to add, my colleague has the right to his opinion, but I'm speaking for the people of the United States. He's not in what he said. The United States has tried every way to seek peace in the Middle East and to defeat terrorism. It is not some kind of a crazy war. What ISIS is doing is criminal, mass murder, gangsterism, a horrible evil. They have to be defeated. They have to be destroyed. There is a coalition built by Secretary of State John Kerry and others that will do this in the end. And to say anything else is just not true. It's nonsense.
Ken, your response.
Well, you know, okay, so Israel, our good friend and ally in the Middle East, is not providing medical support. They are also not having meetings and helping the terrorists in the Golan Heights right now. These terrorists did not receive training in Jordan. You're saying that the Wahhabi terrorist regime funding in Saudi Arabia is not the truth, that our good friend and ally, we sell billions and tens of billions of weapons to Saudi Arabia. You're telling me that they're not supporting these bloodthirsty psychopaths. You're telling me that our good friend and ally in Turkey is not shuttling them across the border. You're telling me that we don't have a very strong history of supporting Al-Qaeda. We don't have a history of supporting all of these groups. You're telling me all of that is fantasy, and that America, what you say, what John Kerry says, and what President Obama says is all the truth. Right? We're supposed to accept that these people are not patent liars and that they seriously don't want war. Are we all supposed to forget the fact that there was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq until we invaded that country? Are we also supposed to forget the fact that there was no Al-Qaeda in Syria until we invaded that country? Are we also supposed to forget the fact that there was no Al-Qaeda in Libya, and that country was actually a successful state until we invaded it? Everything we say is the opposite of the truth, and I just don't know how you can honestly believe that.
Okay, Brent,
well, I have
go
just
ahead,
an article
by
by New York Times on October 14th of 2014 saying, reported a study by the CIA that reviews major terrorist operations run by the White House around the world. Obama is saying that he had asked the CIA to carry out such inquiries in order to find cases of financing and supplying arms to an insurgency in a country that actually worked out well. So he has some reluctance about continuing such efforts now, because he went into Iraq in saying that we're gonna fight against ISIL in order to focus on the new government in Iraq. The Americans exploit such movements and use them in order to equate the equation for the government. Okay,
Dr. Mohsen Saleh, I want to stop you right there because I want to give Brent a chance to respond to all of that. Brent, when we're talking about these articles, there are plenty of evidence to support that what Ken and Dr. Saleh are saying is true.
What are they saying that there are articles that support? To say that the United States supported Al-Qaeda is better fiction than Ernest Hemingway ever wrote. It is absolute nonsense. I can't even use the language to describe what I think of that. It is fiction, it is false, it is untrue. Now, I'm not going to agree with everything that Saudi Arabia has done, and I'm not going to agree with everything that Turkey has done. I don't. And I've never been shy about that. And I also opposed the original war in Iraq by George W. Bush. I thought from the beginning that that was a mistake. But what ISIS is doing is criminal. It's mass murder. It's their own war against true Islam. It violates every tenet of the Prophet Muhammad. They're killing and mass murdering innocent people. There is a need for Shiites and Sunnis and Kurds all over the region to unite and defeat and destroy and kill ISIS. And I don't know any American that I personally know that agrees with what Ken just said. Again, he has the right to his opinion, but he's not representing anybody in the United States. And the New York Times would sue for libel if they thought that they were being...
What is unacceptable? What is unacceptable is your absolute refusal to acknowledge what is a matter of public record at this point. Saudi Arabia and Qatar are the major funders of these psychopaths running around, and they are our best friends and allies. We provide them with arms. We have bases there. This is not disputable. It is absolutely irresponsible, unprofessional, and treasonous of you to deny the fact that we also provided training to the so-called moderates, which are al-Nusra Front.
Hold on a second. I want to interrupt
right
you.
Now.
When you accuse me of treason, let me tell you something. Let me have a minute to answer this nonsense. Of the United States Marines, 99.9% agree with what I just said, and while they wouldn't call you treasonous, they would be embarrassed and ashamed that anybody would wear the Eagle Globe and anchor and accuse me of treason when I'm trying to kill terrorists. And I want Islam...
It's not an argument. The people who have already taken oath to uphold the Constitution in the White House and Congress have...
Stop interrupting me. I want to get my word in here.
Violated that Constitution all the while you sat by...
Okay, Ken, Ken, I want to stop you right there because let's let Brent finish his point there. Go ahead, Brent.
Let me tell you something, Ken. We're not in Putin's Russia, where people interrupt people and berate people like that.
Okay, Brent, it's the nature of the show. It's the nature of the show. Everybody is entitled to jump in and make their point. Go ahead. You'll have your time to do so. Go ahead.
The point is, the fact is, that ISIS is murdering, maiming, killing, beheading Sunnis and Shiites and Kurds. It is a crime against humanity. It is the worst war crime against Adolf Hitler. 99.99% of the American people, the Europeans, and honorable Muslims of Sunni and Shiite all over the region agree with this. I don't want to hear propaganda defending ISIS. I don't want to hear propaganda from an American attacking America. What he said is factually wrong. And most of the American people agree with me. Almost everyone in the United States Marine Corps agree with me. He has the right to his opinion, but he doesn't have the right to make up facts that aren't true and spread lies that are false and attack the United States and all of those Islamic countries that are joining together in the war against ISIS. This may be the only thing that unites the government of the United States and the government of Iran in the war against ISIS, where we're both actually on the same side to kill these mass murdering terrorists. End of discussion. I'm sorry.
Ken, end of discussion. Go ahead, Ken.
Well, this man is an asshole or he's a paid-off prostitute. We know for a fact that we have trained these people in Jordan. This is not disputable. Our good friends and allies in Turkey have been shuttling them across the border. Israel is providing medical attention to them. Not disputable. It's all a matter of public record. Our good friends and allies, who we have not in any way punished, in any way have we sanctioned them, have funded these people. Again, a matter of public record. This ridiculous argument that you speak for America. Are you interrupting me? Are you interrupting me? I thought we didn't live in Putin's Russia. Now,
I want to kill him.
All right, gentlemen. All right, Ken, go ahead.
The greatest disservice of all to American service members. 22 American service members a day are committing suicide because they were sent off to bogus wars like this. We created Al-Qaeda. We created ISIS. If you want to end it, then you need to stop funding it.
Okay, Dr. Saleh, let's go with this. We know that the conflicts in Syria and Iraq cannot be separated. Yet the Obama administration seems to have taken a completely different foreign policy stance towards these two conflicts. Why is that?
Well, first of all, the United States want to ruin all these countries, Iraq, Syria, and other states in the Arab world in order to allow or to reinforce the Israeli presence and effort and power in the region. yesterday or last week, Obama signed a law to permit this or to give this to the Israelis to be the most powerful country in the region. First, second, in order to partition the countries of Iraq and Syria, and that's why the Americans are helping the opposition parties, the terrorists in Syria and in Iraq, in order to pave the way for the politicians in these countries to convince themselves that they can do nothing. And now the United States come to say, in order, well, we are gonna fight ISIS. No, they are returning to the region in order to find their political agenda on the ground. ISIS in the middle, and some of the Ba'athists, all Ba'athists, the south for the Shias, and the Kurds independence in the north, and the other plan also in North Syria. That's why de Mistura came with this plan in order to stop, well, hostilities or fire, to find the way to partition Syria.
Okay, Doctor, let me stop you. Let me stop you right there, because I want to get.
That's how they use ISIL.
Right. Brent, your thoughts on some of that there. Let's look at the White House today. Who is the lesser of two evils, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad or the IS?
Well, actually, I don't agree with everything about our policy. I would be much more against Assad than the Obama administration is. I would not be picking favorites between Assad and ISIS. I think they're both the problem. I think they both committed human rights abuses. I think ISIS is worse, but it's hard to be worse than ISIS. But I wish we had been much more forceful going back 3 years, 2 years, 1 year against Assad as well. I think Assad has butchered 200, 300,000 people in Syria. And when I talk about ISIS, I want to make this clear. My views are representing the views of almost all Muslim countries in that region. My other two colleagues are not. Again, they have the right to their point of view. But what ISIS represents is a threat to Shiites, to Sunnis, and to Kurds all over that region. And that's why so many of them are uniting to defeat ISIS. I'm amazed that I'm the only person, the only guest on this show who can make a declarative statement attacking ISIS and saying they need to be destroyed. I find that astounding. What they are doing is sadistic and disgusting. And I think every person from Ayatollah Khamenei all the way across the other countries in the region share the view that ISIS needs to be defeated and destroyed. It unites Sunnis, it unites Shiites, and it unites Kurds, even if I'm the only one on this show of the three of us that's advocating that position. I'm speaking for all of them. They are not.
Yeah, but Ken, that raises the question, doesn't it, of where does that leave America's fight against Syrian President Bashar al-Assad? Where does that leave America's push to isolate Iran in the region, and so on and so forth?
Well, let's harken back just a little over a decade ago when we were fighting a war on terror against Al-Qaeda. We had to go fight these evil Al-Qaeda folks, trained, and that is indisputable. We had to go fight them now, didn't we? So we went and invaded and occupied Afghanistan, tore that country apart, still going to be real for decades to come. And then we also decided to invade Iraq, which, by the way, had no Al-Qaeda in it when we invaded. Now look at it. It's about, while we were there, who's going to deny that we were absolutely funding death squads that were running around fomenting sectarian hatred that literally did not exist back when we invaded. All of this is part of a larger design, by the way, that goes back to the Project for a New American Century, rebuilding America's defenses and a clean break. It also harkens back to Oded Yanan's strategy for Israel in the 1980s. The plan was always to weaken the surrounding nations for Israel to be expanded to the Great Israel Project. In order to do that, you would send tons of money and weapons and training to the most sadistic sides that you could manage to find, and sow the seeds of sectarian hatred so likely that you could weaken these countries and thereby fracture it and open it up to be invaded and occupied, and ultimately for Israel to expand. All of this is the real plan. But of course, there's no way that any U.S. politician could ever say that openly, because nobody in their right mind would support it. But we do, of course, have stupid people who believe what Obama says and what Bush says and think that are actually fighting against terrorists, when in fact our best friends and allies are funding this, and it's totally undeniable. We need a boogeyman. We need a boogeyman to justify the never-ending war policy. This is how it works.
Okay, on that note, let's move on, Dr. Salik. The Syrian crisis was one of the early developments that really brought to the forefront the divisions between Moscow and Washington, which some came to regard as the early signs that the Cold War never really ended.
Absolutely, it did not end because the United States wants always to have foe in the world, and Islam and Russia and whoever allies itself with the independent countries like Iran and Russia and China. The United States tries to destabilize these countries in order to be the only hegemony in the world. And that's what Obama said it many times in his speeches, whether in the United Nations or in other occasions. I guess the United States still believes itself as the most and alone superpower in the whole world, and that's what makes the United States commit such crimes against the Russians, the Iranians, by sanctions in terms of economy or in terms of military actions in Syria and in Iraq. Of course, I guess the Russians have the right to defend themselves, the Iranians as well, and the Syrians. Here I should recall that the United States failed to change the whole world, especially in Iraq and in Syria. And the people of Iraq and Syria will not really surrender to the American dictations, whether in Iraq and Syria, and of course in Russia. That's why when we hear Putin saying that this empire will find itself in a great quandary if they are going to continue in trying to contain these countries.
Brent, what are your thoughts? Is 2014 the year that saw the reemergence of the Cold War?
It was the year that Vladimir Putin brought to life the Cold War again. Vladimir Putin, who regretted that the first Cold War ended. Vladimir Putin, who said very
Putin
clearly,
is defending himself.
The great tragedies was when the Soviet dictatorship and destroyed. Vladimir Putin put Russian paramilitary, Russian tanks, and Russian boats in Ukraine. And when there was an election in Ukraine.
Okay, Brent, unfortunately, we are having some trouble hearing you. We are going to try and get that fixed as the show goes on. Ken, let me jump over to you. We have Obama's UN General Assembly speech this year where he listed the Russians on the same list of threats as the IS and Ebola.
I'm just amazed at what can come out of the mouth of American citizens, and it really is beggars belief that people can actually get up and say this stuff with a straight face. You know, this new Cold War being created, which could very much become a hot war, because we see NATO expanding. We see that America has violated every agreement it made in the aftermath of the fall of the Soviet Union. We see that it wants to bring Ukraine forward. We see even things as so patently obvious as the downing of the Malaysian Airlines flight over Ukraine. I remember a day after in London looking at a newspaper headline in which it was basically blaming Putin within a day. And you still hear this idea being parroted in Western media, when the fact is that we know from the evidence that it's already publicly available, first of all, that Putin never unless he's a madman, and secondly, that this was brought down by Ukrainian fighters, Ukrainian jets. We even have an eyewitness who's come out publicly and stated so, but the physical evidence also establishes this. We also see things like America saying that that Russia is being aggressive when we talk about Crimea.
Okay, Ken, Brent, let's let Brent respond to some of that there. Go ahead, Brent, jump in.
And let me say, number one, when you say that you're amazed that Americans think that, I'll repeat this. 99.9% of Americans agree with me, not you.
Americans, just you, actually.
Now,
I mean, most Americans
may I finish the sentence? Are you going to let me finish the sentence? You know, you may want to work for Putin, but where I come from, you let the other person finish the sentence.
Yeah, finish the sentence.
It was Vladimir Putin who's had so many sanctions against him for his behavior that his economy is on the brink of a depression. He's destroying his own economy for his own people. because he wanted to reinitiate the Cold War. He isolated the world community against
Wait, but hang on, Brent, for a moment there, because the people, there seems to be a shortness of memory here, isn't it? NATO's expansion further east that essentially violated the agreements made between Moscow and Washington following the end of the first Cold War, or the original Cold War, if we can call it that.
There aren't many countries that agree with Putin about this. Most of them agree with me. I mean, the fact is that NATO countries have a right to do what they want. They are free and independent countries. If you go to people in Poland, the Czech Republic, all the Eastern European countries, they are terrified of what Vladimir Putin would do, because they know, as I said, that Vladimir Putin is the one who said it was one of the great tragedies that the Soviet Empire was defeated. That's not me speaking only. That's Lech Walesa, that's the Eastern Europeans, just like the people of Ukraine, just like people of Western Europe. I mean, this is a problem that if Putin doesn't address it, there will be a depression in the Russian economy caused by his actions that has so alienated the world.
Well, this depression already happened in the EU. Many countries, in Spain, in Italy, in Greece, in many countries of the EU. So you are dragging Ukraine into this depression. So that's what we want to do? That's how the Americans agree with you?
It was Vladimir Putin that interfered with Ukraine, and it was Eastern Europe, Western Europe, the civilized world, and the United States that responded against them. Almost every country in Europe agrees with me and with what I'm saying. It's not just the United States. It's not just Western Europe. It's all over Eastern Europe. It's all over. What happened in the Cold War ended. And Putin regrets that, and he's trying to bring it back, and the world is rejecting that. Now, if he wants to destroy the Russian economy by making his allies separatists who kill people in eastern Ukraine, and I don't want to hear the lie that it was Poroshenko's government that shot down that plane. That is nonsense. And you don't want to quote the New York Times to that effect, trust me, okay? Because they would sue you for quoting them that way. That what's happened by Putin is an outrage. The world community is against it. The sanctions are going to destroy Russia with oil prices and with the depression. And Vladimir Putin has done more damage to Russia by trying to bring back the Cold War. So yes, you're right. That 2014 was the year that Putin brought back the Cold War. Now, my hope, if you want a little bit of optimism, is things are so bad in Russia now because of Putin that he will back off and there will be an opportunity to have better relations in 2015, because I think, while he'll never admit it, he's learned that what he did is hurt his country, hurt his economy, and hurt his standing in the world.
Who is responsible about the oil fall of the prices in the world? Not the Saudis and the Americans. So who is really attracting and bringing the Cold War against countries such as Iran and Russia?
Okay, Ken, I want to get your thoughts on some of that, especially what Brent was saying regarding the way that Putin and Moscow is viewed in the world today. To what degree has Washington's foreign policy been successful in propagating this anti-Moscow line internationally?
I think probably Putin has higher approval ratings in the United States than President Obama does. He most certainly has way higher approval ratings, over 80% in Russia. American politicians could only dream of having that kind of approval rating. And the fact is that the accusations that Russia is acting aggressive, when everyone who has a brain that actually functions knows full well, if the situation were reversed, Mexico had billions and billions of dollars of basically money to stir it up coming from the Russians, and we knew this to be true. As Victoria knew, it is very well known, billions were poured into Ukraine to stir it up. If the Russians were doing that, and we were the ones stirring it up, if the Russians were stirring it up, what would America have done? America would have launched a full-scale invasion into Mexico immediately, and we probably would have laid waste to half the country by now, even tempted by the Russian side. Russia does not have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of military bases all around the world. Russia did not take over Crimea. The Crimeans begged them to come in. Over 95% of the Ukrainians that come in. We don't want any part of this mess that's going on in Kiev. Putin has got way more appeal around the world than Obama or any of these puppet prostitute Western leaders do. The rest of the world can see America and its so transparent, aggressive actions. The fact is, it's America invading, occupying, arming, funding terrorism all around the world. And whether the American public agrees with this man in Washington or not, it would only indict them for high treason or absolute stupidity if they agree with what this man is saying, because basically he's taking his talking points directly from the State Department.
Okay, Dr. Saleh, in May of this year, Obama gave a speech at the military base West Point,
yes.
During which he said, and I'm quoting here, Russia's aggression towards former Soviet states unnerves capitals in Europe, while China's economic rise and military reach worries its neighbors. From Brazil to India, rising middle classes compete with us. So the United States is and remains the one indispensable nation that has been true for the century past, and it will be true for the century to come. It almost seems like Obama is saying that anybody challenging Washington's hegemony must be crushed.
Well, that's his dream, but this dream will not come true because the BRICS countries will overcome such crises, especially in oil and other problems, Russia especially. The Chinese are growing and developing, and all these countries, Venezuela and Brazil and India, over the world, they have the two-thirds of the population in the whole world, and I guess the United States is retreating from. That's why I guess by creating such a bugaboo like ISIL and other movements, I guess the Americans are losing the theater in the political scene in the whole world. That's why also I guess the Chinese and the Russians and the BRICS countries will be ready to challenge the United States in terms of economy and also, if it's needed, in terms of military actions, because the Russians now are intending to reinforce and empower their military sites and military tools to confront the United States if the United States still really threaten others by a military action. And doing so, the United States really is trying to say, well, still we are the only one who can really direct the ship in the whole world, and that's not the case. The Chinese and the Iranians and the Russians now are very powerful countries. We should witness a new age of multipolar countries in the whole world, and I guess the Americans should depart from such premise in the past and now to move in order to have really to come to terms with others, have new rapprochement, new philosophy in the political agenda and plans, and not to commit crimes. Last year, the beginning of this year, there is a poll saying that the United States, the biggest threat to the world peace today.
Okay, before you start making that point, Dr. Saleh, let me stop you right there, because
this will not benefit the Americans, the 99% who might agree.
Okay, Brent, I want to get your thoughts. I want to get your thoughts on some of that. There, we have Beijing and Moscow, which signed a multi-billion-dollar gas deal earlier this year. To what degree is the Sino-Russian relationship a threat to the U.S.?
Oh, it's not a threat to the U.S., but we are in a multipolar world. The United States does not want and does not have hegemony. In a multipolar world, there are countries all over the world that have a right, a seat at the table, and a level of influence. I will say, though, that when we're talking about Ukraine and Russia, it's not the United States. It's the United States plus Western Europe, plus Eastern Europe, plus people of Ukraine who are united, solid like a rock against Russia. Against ISIS, it's the United States working with Sunni countries, Shia countries, and Kurds united like a rock against ISIS. You may have found the only American in Ken. He has the right to his opinion. But you may have found the only American who supports Putin and ISIS in one sitting. That's amazing. I don't know any others.
I won't stand for that. I will not stand for that.
I don't. States working with all of these countries
support
around the
ISIS.
world.
You're the one that's supporting ISIS because you're the one supporting the criminal government that is allowing the democracy to fund it, to arm it, to train it, to provide every means of support. Don't you dare equate this with supporting these psychopath mercenaries that we fund.
Okay, Brent, let me stop you right there because we can't hear what either of you are saying. I want to jump over to Ken and give him an opportunity to respond. Let me stop you right there for just a moment, Brent.
Against ISIS, it's the multipolar world.
I will
against
not
ISIS.
Allow this traitor
Now,
to accuse me of supporting ISIS.
But all these other countries agree with me.
Okay, Ken, go ahead.
This man is a traitor. He's what they call a chicken hawk. He's never been in the military. He's going to fight these wars that we start. It's the 22 American servicemen and women who will I'm being loyal to, who are committing suicide every day because they get sent off to these chicken hawk wars where these cowards throw out so many planes but will never fight these wars. The fact is that ISIS is a creation of us. I am absolutely opposed to ISIS, as I am opposed to Al-Qaeda, as I'm opposed to state-sponsored terrorism, and I obviously know what everybody with a brain that functions knows. America is the largest purveyor of violence on this planet. Martin Luther King said it before he was murdered, and it's as true then as it is today.
Okay, Brent, I want to give you a quick chance to respond, and then we'll move on.
I have nothing to say. I think my point's been made.
Fair enough. Dr. Saleh, moving on to the Asia-Pacific region, with the U.S. directing its naval might towards China now, are we in for a possible confrontation there between Beijing and Washington as well?
Well, the Americans are trying to tease the Chinese, but I guess the Chinese are dealing with the issue in a very cold blood, and they are trying to protect their interests in the Pacific, and I guess the United States is weaker than trying to hegemonize the Asian continent, and they have tried in the western part, in Iraq and in Syria, and they failed. And going there in order to cut China from Africa and other places and from the Middle East, and I guess they will fail as they failed in Iraq and Syria. And it's good for the United States now to deal with the international issues, whether with China and Russia, in a different mind, as I said, and try to make a balance between its economy and others' economy. The others, they want to live and develop and have independence, whether in Ukraine, for the relationship between Ukraine and Russia, they have the right to do so, and other countries, as you said, $400 billion in a deal with Russia, gas deal, and also they have deals with the Iranians and with Venezuela, and that's why I guess the United States is really overjumping or enlarging itself in the world, and it's about time to take its real and size and real volume, and encouraging Turkey and Saudi Arabia to make problems and fuss in the whole world. I guess it won't succeed in doing so. These countries become very weak, Turkey and Saudi Arabia, and look what's happening in Bahrain as well. Look, the Americans are silent about these barbaric atrocities committed by the regime against the revolution, the peaceful revolution, and the United States and the United Nations and the European Union, they are not talking, and they are not saying anything about these regimes who really are backed by the United States, protected by the United States, and encouraged by the United States. Look at this mind who is really from the medieval ages,
okay.
How they are protecting these,
speaking of another protest movement, we have one, Brent, in Hong Kong currently, the occupied Central Hong Kong movement. How useful of a card is that for Washington to use against Beijing?
Well, I don't view it as a card. I view it as democracy and human rights that the United States should support. If anything, the United States should support it even more than we have.
Well, why don't they support Bahrainis then in their push for freedom and democracy and rights?
Oh, I think I'm for human rights everywhere. And again, I'm not going to agree with everything that the U.S. has done. I did not support. I opposed going to war in Iraq under George W. Bush. I was against that. But I think the United States should have done much more when the Tiananmen Square students were gunned down by the Chinese. We didn't do more because there were business interests involved. And everybody that knows about it knows that's the reason. But I think what you're seeing in Hong Kong is a movement for human rights and democracy by the people, which I hope every country that believes in democracy will support those young people in Hong Kong. I fear they won't as much as they should. I hope they do. I think we should support human rights movements in all countries. I don't think it's right that Egypt jails Al Jazeera reporters. I think that's wrong. I think it's wrong when they declare crimes against the Egyptian opponents, which in many cases are not crimes. I think we should oppose that as well. For the same reason I opposed Mubarak, and for the same reason I supported the young people and the women at Tahrir Square. There are all kinds of difficulties, contradictions, and human rights challenges that I think all countries, including my own, could do a better job at. No doubt about it.
Ken, what would you say to the differences in Washington's rhetoric towards the Hong Kong protest, which is in China, and the ongoing protests against police brutality across the U.S.?
You know, it's already, your point has really been made. I mean, when it comes to Bahrain, or let's really look at the most grotesque regime on the planet, Saudi Arabia. They're cutting off people's heads. They're cutting off hands. Women aren't allowed to walk the streets alone or drive. This is all perfectly okay. One military contract alone was worth $60 billion to Saudi Arabia. America does not care about human rights at all. It has nothing to do with the real foreign policy agenda. For the masses have to be spoon-fed this kind of rubbish because, of course, the masses would never supporting medieval head-cutter, chopping off heads in Saudi Arabia regimes. If they really knew the truth of the cozy little relationship we have with Saudi Arabia or Bahrain or many countries of this nature. Hell, our best friend and ally, if we'll all recall back in Saddam Hussein, when he was gassing the Kurds and the Iranians, guess what? The CIA was providing him with coordinates so he could do more of it. When he was killing dissidents, he was being supported. States is a best friend and ally. So the United States does not care about rights. Anybody who thinks so is an idiot, and this man in Washington is an idiot. That's being complimentary because the result of this type of rhetoric is to actually cause the American people, sons and daughters, to be forced to go and fight more wars. And when they go and fight these wars, they end up becoming so starved that many of them will come home and commit suicide. I don't want to fight. I want a third world war, and in order for us to prevent a third world war, we have to be honest about what's really happening. And the United States is the largest purveyor of violence of the 20th and 21st century, and it provides absolutely essential support and training and funding to the worst terrorists on earth right now in Syria. And one last point I have to make, this man talks about how effectively Bashar al-Assad and ISIS.
Okay, Brent, I want to stop you right there because unfortunately we are having a little bit.
That is removed from the equation. That's a bag that will be filled. And who will it be filled by? It'll be filled by those who are the most bloodthirsty and armed in Syria. That means ISIS will fill that vacuum. And this is basically what the agenda calls for. That's exactly what's intended.
Okay, Brent, I know you want to disagree with most of that. Go ahead.
I don't think it's worth the response. I think it's so silly. If you ever do a show about literary fiction, I'll be glad to talk to Ken. He's good at it.
Okay, Dr. Saleh, let's move on to Latin America. The U.S. Senate has passed a bill earlier this month to impose sanctions against Venezuela, also allegedly over its violations of human rights and violations of the rights of protesters, which were going on earlier this year. How effective are sanctions against the state that still adheres to the principles of the Bolivarian revolution?
I think they have no effects. And of course, the Americans are trying to open a new chapter with Cuba. I am surprised that they are trying to open a contrary chapter with Venezuela. Bigger, richer, people love the regime, Hugo Chavez and Maduro. And I guess the Americans are really trying to depend on losers in Latin America and in other places, like they have bet on Saudis. And of course, most of the Americans, I guess, they don't like such regimes. It's not surprising that the United States really back such regimes and don't like independent regimes, whether in Venezuela or in Cuba or in Iran or in Russia or in China or in any place. These countries want to have independence and development by their own way, own culture, own way of life, and own way of thinking. And that's why the United States will fail also in its backyard in the Latin America in doing changes. The changes from Nicaragua to Salvador to other places. It's not the 70s of the 20th century that they can do what they have done in Chile, killing Allende and bringing Pinochet. It's time for the United States also to review its political agenda in Latin America, to let Latin Americans at least live peacefully with the United States.
Okay, gentlemen, on that note, I'm afraid that we have run out of time for this evening. I want to thank all three of my guests in the studio, Dr. Mohsen Saleh, former U.S. Marine Ken O'Keefe in Malaga, Spain, and Brent Budowski, a columnist at The Hill from Washington, D.C. Thank you all very much for being here tonight. And thank you for watching. Don't forget, you can catch us again in the new year. Goodbye for now.